Uvalde, Texas. In front of Robb Elementary School, we stood before 21 crosses for 19 third and fourth graders and 2 teachers. On each cross a name. And nearby, a photo of each victim that Jill and I reached out to touch. Innocent victims murdered in a classroom that have been turned into a killing field. Standing there in that small town, like so many other communities across America, I couldn't help but think there are too many other schools, too many other everyday places that have become killing fields, battlefields, here in America. We stood at such a place just 12 days before. Buffalo, New York, memorializing 10 fellow Americans, a spouse, a parent, a grandparent, a sibling, gone forever. At both places, we spent hours with hundreds of family members who were broken, whose lives will never be the same. They had one message for all of us. Do something. Just do something. For God's sake, do something. After Columbine, after Sandy Hook, after Charleston, after Orlando, after Las Vegas, after Parkland, nothing has been done. This time that can't be true. This time we must actually do something. The issue we face is one of conscience and common sense. For so many of you at home, I want to be very clear. This is not about taking away anyone's guns. It's not about vilifying gun owners. In fact, we believe we should be treating responsible gun owners as an example of how every gun owner should behave. I respect the culture and the tradition and the concerns of lawful gun owners. At the same time, the Second Amendment, like all other rights, is not absolute. It was Justice Scalia who wrote, and I quote, like most rights, the rights granted by the Second Amendment are not unlimited. Not unlimited. It never has been. There have always been limitations on what weapons you can own in America. For example, machine guns have been federally regulated for nearly 90 years, and this is still a free country. This isn't about taking away anyone's rights. It's about protecting children. It's about protecting families. It's about protecting whole communities. It's about protecting our freedom to go to school, to a grocery store, to a church, without being shot and killed. According to new data just released by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, guns are the #1 killer of children in the United States of America. The #1 killer. More than car accidents, more than cancer. Over the last 2 decades, more school-age children have died from guns than on-duty police officers and active-duty military combined. Think about that. More kids than on-duty cops killed by guns. More kids than soldiers killed by guns. For God's sake, how much more carnage are we willing to accept? How many more innocent American lives must be taken before we say enough? Enough. I know that we can't prevent every tragedy, but here's what I believe we have to do. Here's what the overwhelming majority of American people believe we must do. Here's what the families in Buffalo and Uvalde in Texas told us we must do. We need to ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. And if we can't ban assault weapons, then we should raise the age to purchase them from 18 to 21. Strengthen background checks. Enact safe storage law and red flag laws. Repeal the immunity that protects gun manufacturers from liability. Address the mental health crisis, deepening the trauma of gun violence and as a consequence of that violence. These are rational, common sense measures. Here's what it all means. It all means this. We should reinstate the assault weapons ban on high-capacity magazines that we passed in 1994 with bipartisan support in Congress and the support of law enforcement. 9 categories of semi-auto included in that ban, like AK-47s and AR-15s. And in the 10 years it was law, mass shootings went down. But after Republicans let the law expire in 2004, and those weapons were allowed to be sold again, mass shootings tripled. Those are the facts. A few years ago, the family of the inventor of the AR-15 said he would have been horrified to know that its design was being used to slaughter children and other innocent lives instead of being used as a military weapon on the battlefields as it was designed. That's what it was designed for. Enough. Enough. Why in God's name should an ordinary citizen be able to purchase an assault weapon that holds 30-round magazines that let mass shooters fire hundreds of bullets in a matter of minutes? The damage is so devastating in Uvalde, parents had to do DNA swabs to identify the remains of their children. 9 and 10-year-old children. Enough. We should expand background checks to keep guns out of the hands of felons, fugitives, and those under restraining orders. Stronger background checks are something that the vast majority of Americans, including the majority of gun owners, agree on. I also believe we should have safe storage laws and personal liability for not locking up your gun. The shooter in Sandy Hook was full of guns. They were too easy to access. That's how he got the weapons. He needed to kill his mother and murder 26 people, including 20 first graders. If you own a weapon, you have a responsibility to secure it. Every responsible gun owner agrees to make sure no one else can have access to it, to lock it up, to have trigger locks. And if you don't, and something bad happens, you should be held responsible. We should also have national red flag laws so that a parent, a teacher, a counselor can flag for a court that a child, a student, a patient is exhibiting violent tendencies, threatening classmates, or experiencing suicidal thoughts. It makes them a danger to themselves or to others. 19 states in the District of Columbia have red flag laws. The Delaware law is named after my son, Attorney General Bo Biden. Fort Hood, Texas, 2009, 13 dead and more than 30 injured. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, 2018, 17 dead, 17 injured. In both places, countless others suffering with invisible wounds. Red flag laws could have stopped both these shooters. In Uvalde, the shooter was 17 when he asked his sister to buy him an assault weapon, knowing he'd be denied because he was too young to purchase one himself. She refused. But as soon as he turned 18, he purchased 2 assault weapons for himself. Because in Texas, you can be 18 years old and buy an assault weapon, even though you can't buy a pistol in Texas until you're 21. If we can't ban assault weapons, as we should, we must at least raise the age to be able to purchase one to 21. Look, I know some folks will say 18-year-olds can serve in the military and fire those weapons. But that's with training and supervision by the best trained experts in the world. Don't tell me raising the age won't make a difference. Enough. We should repeal the liability shield that often protects gun manufacturers from being sued for the death and destruction caused by their weapons. They're the only industry in this country that has that kind of immunity. Imagine if the tobacco industry had been immune from being sued, where we'd be today. The gun industry's special protections are outrageous. It must end. And let there be no mistake about the psychological trauma that gun violence leaves behind. Imagine being that little girl, that brave little girl in Uvalde, who smeared blood off her murdered friend's body on her own face to lie still among the corpses in her classroom and pretend she was dead in order to stay alive. Imagine what it'd be like for her to walk down the hallway of any school again. Imagine what it's like for children who experience this kind of trauma every day in school, in the streets, in communities all across America. Imagine what it's like for so many parents to hug their children goodbye in the morning, not sure whether they'll come back home. Unfortunately, too many people don't have to imagine that at all. Even before the pandemic, young people were already hurting. There's a serious youth mental health crisis in this country. We have to do something about it. That's why mental health is the heart of my unity agenda that I laid out in the State of the Union address this year. We must provide more school counselors, more school nurses, more mental health services for students and for teachers, more people volunteering as mentors to help young people succeed, more privacy protection and resources to keep kids safe from the harms of social media. This unity agenda won't fully heal the wounded souls, but it will help. It matters. I just told you what I'd do. The question now is, what will the Congress do? The House of Representatives already passed key measures we need. Expanding background checks to cover nearly all gun sales, including at gun shows and online sales. Getting rid of the loophole allows a gun sale to go through after 3 business days, even if the background check has not been completed. The House is planning even more action next week. Safe storage requirements, the banning of high-capacity magazines, raising the age to buy an assault weapon to 21, federal red flag law, codifying my ban on ghost guns that don't have serial numbers and can't be traced, and tougher laws to prevent gun trafficking and straw purchases. This time, we have to take the time to do something. And this time, it's time for the Senate to do something. But as we know, in order to get anything done in the Senate, we need a minimum of 10 Republican senators. Support the bipartisan efforts that include a small group of Republican senators trying to find a way. The fact that the majority of the Senate Republicans don't want any of these proposals even to be debated or come up for a vote, I find unconscionable. We can't fail the American people again. Since Uvalde, just over a week ago, there have been 20 other mass shootings in America, each with 4 or more people killed or injured, including yesterday at a hospital in Tulsa, Oklahoma. A shooter deliberately targeted a surgeon using an assault weapon he bought just a few hours before his rampage that left a surgeon, another doctor, or injured. I don't count the carnage we see. It doesn't make the headlines. I've been in this fight for a long time. I know how hard it is, but I'll never give up. And if Congress fails, I believe this time a majority of the American people won't give up either. I believe the majority of you will act to turn your outrage into making this issue central to your vote. Enough, enough, enough. Over the next 17 days, the families in Uvalde will continue burying their dead. It will take that long in part because it's a town where everyone knows everyone. And day by day, they will honor each one they lost. Jill and I met with the owner and staff of the funeral home as being strong to take care of their own. And the people of Uvalde mourn as they do over the next 17 days. What will we be doing as a nation? Jill and I met with the sister of the teacher who was murdered and whose husband died of a heart attack 2 days later, leaving behind 4 beautiful orphan children, all now orphaned. The sister asked us, what could she say? What could she tell her nieces and nephews? It's the most heartbreaking moments that I can remember. All I could think to say was, I told her to hold them tight. Hold them tight. As you're visiting the school, we attended Mass at Sacred Heart Catholic Church with Father Eddie. In the pews, families and friends held each other. tightly. As Archbishop Gustavo spoke, he asked the children in attendance to come up in the altar, sit in the altar with him as he spoke. There wasn't enough room, so Mom and her young son sat next to Jill and me in the first pew. And as we left the church, a grandmother who had just lost her granddaughter passed me a handwritten letter. It read, quote, "Erase the invisible line that is dividing our nation. Come up with a solution and fix what's broken and make the changes that are necessary to prevent this from happening again." End of quote. My fellow Americans, enough. Enough. It's time for each of us to do our part. It's time to act for the children we've lost, the children we can save, for the nation we love. Let's hear the call and the cry. Let's meet the moment. Let us finally. God bless the families who are hurting. God bless you all. From a hymn based on the 91st Psalm sung in my church. May he raise you up on eagle's wings and bury you on the breath of dawn. Make you to shine like the sun and hold you in the palm of his hand. That's my prayer for all of you. God bless you.
President Biden at the White House tonight with his request for Congress and his thoughts for the American people, and in particular for the communities that have suffered unspeakable loss in these last few weeks. He spoke of his visits with the First Lady to Buffalo and Uvalde, and he said the families that they spoke with, they had one message for us all: do something, just do something. He spoke of Columbine, Sandy Hook, Orlando, Las Vegas, and the shootings we have faced in this country in just the last couple of weeks, and he said we have done nothing. He also added, I want to make it very clear, and these were the president's words, he said, I'm not about taking away anyone's guns. In fact, we believe we should be treating responsible gun owners as an example of how every gun owner should behave in this country. And then he laid it out. Here's what the president wants to happen in this country. He said we need to ban assault weapons in this country. And if we can't do that, he said we must raise the age from 18 to 21 to buy those assault-style rifles that have been used in these mass shootings, particularly in these last couple of weeks. He said we must strengthen background checks, strengthen red flag warnings, get rid of immunity for gun manufacturers, and mental health crisis, the help for people who are suffering in this country. I want to bring in Mary Bruce at the White House. Mary, you heard the president there say, I've been in this fight for a long time, and that's an understatement. We remember when President Obama named then Vice President Joe Biden to lead the effort after Sandy Hook.
David, Joe Biden knows this fight well, and he knows what an uphill battle it is. He knows all the political reality that he is facing. And, it strikes me listening to this that what Biden said then 10 years ago, after 20 children were massacred, and he was put in charge by President Obama to lead this charge for gun reforms, what he said then is very similar, almost exactly the same to what he said tonight. Is this time it? Is this time going to be enough? This time 19 children killed. Is this going to finally spur Washington to act? And he knows that unfortunately in the past it simply hasn't. It doesn't seem that anything has been enough. And I asked the president just yesterday, is he confident that this time will be just that? Will this be different? And he said to me very bluntly, he is never confident. He knows that even though they are encouraged by the fact that there are at least talks, that at least Washington seems to be willing to try and do something, he knows that this is still a real long shot despite the violence that we continue to see in this country. And David, this speech tonight was aimed, of course, at the American people, but also at lawmakers, because the president knows that in order to keep up the pressure on Washington, he has to come out and deliver speeches like this and remind the American public and the people listening up on Capitol Hill that the majority of Americans want to see some change here.
Well, stay with us here, Mary. You bring up Capitol Hill, so let's go there next. Rachel Scott on the Hill for us again tonight. And Rachel, every night you've been reporting here on these talks. It's a small group of senators, bipartisan senators. We know Congress in recess, but they have been meeting over Zoom. You reported on this. What's on the table here? What's potentially viable?
Well, David, some of what the president outlined tonight, some of it, not all of it, is on the table in these bipartisan discussions that have been playing out in the Senate. We know that expanding background checks, for one, is something that senators are discussing. start bolstering those red flag laws. Republicans also want to see more money for school security, for mental health. And as Mary points out, the majority of Americans do want something done on this issue. The majority of Americans do support expanded background checks. They do support red flag laws. But of course, this will be an uphill challenge. These talks are very delicate because Democrats need the support of at least 10 Republicans in order to get any legislation passed in the Senate, David.
Yeah, that's the political reality. When you talk about the majority of Americans, we're not talking about a simple majority. This is the vast majority in the polling across the board in recent years on this. Rachel, a quick follow to you because you mentioned stronger background checks, perhaps stronger red flag warnings are on the table with these bipartisan senators. Of course, you mentioned there's a major hurdle because they would then need to get significant Republican support even for that. But you heard the president there talk about banning assault weapons in this country. Take Texas, for example, where we know the suspect authorities say turned 18. The next day he bought that AR-15 style rifle. Would anything you're hearing being discussed right now affect a purchase like that?
You know, David, it may not have been enough to stop the suspect in Texas, but the president pointed out that it may have been enough to stop other suspects in other mass shootings that have happened in this country. Democrats do want to go further. They want to ban assault weapons outright. They do want to raise the legal age limit required to purchase an AR-15 style weapon. But I can tell you, I've been talking to a lot of Republican sources over the course of the last few days, and for them, that is a non-starter. So Democrats to be able to get something here. 30 years of congressional inaction on this issue, David, and they want this time to be different.
Yeah, just to underscore that one point you just made, this notion the president said to raise the age in the country from 18 to 21 on these AR-15 style weapons, that's off the table for Republicans?
Off the table, from what I am told from Republican sources in the Senate, that is something that they do not want. That is a non-starter for them at this point, David.
All right, Rachel Scott, who continues to report this out from Capitol Hill for us. Rachel, thank you. Let's bring in our Chief Justice Correspondent, Pierre Thomas, in Washington as well. Pierre, we heard the president say this again. He has said this in the recent weeks after previous mass shootings and now after Tulsa has been added to the list here. He said once again that we should reinstate the assault weapons ban that passed in '94 with bipartisan support. We know that lasted 10 years. It was allowed to expire when Republicans were in control. He talked about the stats after it expired. He said mass shootings went down while the assault weapons ban was in effect. When they expired in 2004, he said those weapons were allowed to be sold again. Mass shootings have tripled. Has our team had time to fact check that?
David, we think he's citing a New York University study showing a slight decrease in mass shootings when the assault weapons ban was in place and a surge in a decade right after it was allowed to lapse. And in fact, we know we've seen a dramatic rise in mass shootings recently, so that is not in debate, David.
One other thing, Pierre, when we have you, it's something you've been reporting out for many, many weeks now. Even before these most recent mass shootings, you were telling us that law enforcement sources, they're aware, obviously, of this problem of gun violence in the country, of these mass shootings, but there's a double concern right now because of the pandemic this country's been living through 2.5 years now. The mental health toll on top of what we already know are people suffering and an issue with weapons in this country that they think that you were telling us they were warning that this could be a very difficult summer ahead.
In fact, David, they've been talking about how the pandemic exacerbated what I call the misery index, and others call the misery index, that people are unstable, they're angry, and they have an incredible access to guns, which sales have been skyrocketing in recent years. So it's a interesting, terrible convergence the sources are talking about. And David, they have been warning repeatedly that this lone wolf factor of people who have all kinds of different kinds of grievances, from anger about politics to mental health issues, they are now taking access to these weapons and going out and killing people. The FBI director said it is our most imminent threat.
Pierre Thomas with us as well. Thank you. I want to bring in Marcus Moore in Texas tonight. He's in San Antonio. Marcus, you heard the president there say you can't buy a pistol in Texas, but you can buy an AR-15 style rifle that we saw used in Uvalde. This suspect that turned 18 went to buy it the next day, bought another weapon a couple of days later. Governor Abbott in Texas had supported at one point in recent years red flag warnings of some sort that perhaps might have set up some sort of red flag with this suspect or perhaps with others, but that fell by the wayside.
Yeah, it did. That was in response, David, to the shooting there at the school in Santa Fe back in 2018. 10 people were killed there. And at the time, he asked lawmakers to consider perhaps red flag laws, putting those on the books, or at least to investigate and explore whether or not those types of laws would be effective here, and essentially taking guns or allowing the courts to take guns away from anyone who is deemed a threat to others or to themselves. He didn't particularly or specifically endorse that idea, but he did ask lawmakers to consider it. It's and it kind of just fizzled out, as it were. Nothing happened with that law. And now, once again, it does beg the question, could it have prevented the shooting here? And David, I do want to point out, we are in Texas, and this is a state that has seen a number of mass shootings. In 2017, the church shooting in Sutherland Springs, 26 people were killed. And you'll recall the shooting in El Paso, where 23 people were killed at a store. And so this is something that we're once again here in Texas, they are enduring yet another mass shooting, and many people asking what can be done. And they are looking to legislators to do something, as we heard the president say.
Marcus Moore in Texas for us. Marcus, thank you. One final question before we go tonight, and for that we go back to the White House and Mary Bruce, because I think we're always reminded we're in a country right now exhausted by it all, the pandemic, by these mass shootings, by so many other issues we face in these times. Is the president, is this White House hopeful that even though they're aware of the political hurdles here, that perhaps this exhaustion in the country will be recognized by lawmakers in Washington?
That's certainly the hope, and I do think they see some cause for optimism, even if it is just slight optimism. You know, the fact that they're even talking right now is a good sign for this White House. It is interesting, the president himself has not been directly involved in those talks yet. When I've pressed the White House and asked why not, they say he wants to give Congress space right now to see if they can find some shreds of common ground. But I think we have to be realistic. But right now, the president and the top Republican in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, don't even agree on the problem. Mitch McConnell says that this is an issue of mental health and school safety, and whether they're going to be able to come together is still a huge X factor. The president outlining his demands tonight, but David, those are demands he's been making for decades, demands that he has been making through several rounds of unsuccessful efforts in this fight. The question now, can they find common ground? Just how meaningful and impactful will it be?
Mary, thank you. 3 final images here before I go. Let's take a look. These are the faces of the children in Uvalde, 4th graders going to funerals now for their friends. In Tulsa, overnight, the hospital. And in Buffalo, of course, the Tops supermarket. We are thinking about all of those families. I'm David Muir. Good night.
Hollywood, it's Chip Live, NBA Finals Game Night, tonight, Adam Silver and John Basketball, presented by
In prime time for Game 1 of the NBA Finals between Boston and Golden State, the Warriors versus the Celtics is basically Braveheart with a basketball. You know, the last time these teams met in the finals was 1964, back when you get a loaf of bread for 30 cents. Movie ticket cost $1.25. You could buy a 2-story house in Ohio for a bag full of tin cans back in 1964. It's some sort of a good sale. Last year they didn't make the playoffs. The year before that, they had the worst record in the NBA, and now they're back in the finals for the 6th time in 8 years, and the San Fran fans are fired up.
Coming hard in the finals, whether it's the Celtics, the Heat, bring it on, baby, roll it out.
Really let himself go. The Celtics haven't been into the championship series in over a decade, and this was the scene outside TD Garden after they knocked off the Heat.
2008, I was 7 years old. That's the last time they won. Let's go, Celtics, baby!
This teenager from Boston had the foresight to get a Celtics 2022 championship tattoo in March. 3 months ago, he got the tattoo. Now, while your first reaction might be, well, that's not a great decision, you have to then answer face of a person who makes bad decisions. So to recap, if the Celtics lose, that guy will have the stupid tattoo on his shoulder for the rest of his life. But if they win, still will have the stupid tattoo. The Warriors are the slight favorite to win this series, and Steph Curry is the odds-on favorite to win his first Finals MVP. Second in the Final Six times. It's crazy he hasn't won an MVP. It's like finding out that Meryl Streep doesn't have an Oscar, or that Matt Damon does have an Oscar. It makes no sense. The Warriors and the Celtics are the top two defensive teams in the league. Hopefully, they'll be able to ward off the new variants of the coronavirus. You know, the Bay Area is a major COVID hotspot. Chase Arena, where the Warriors play, has been hit particularly hard. Employees are missing work. Mustard dispensers are going unrefilled. And hot dog delays. It's a nightmare. If you love your team, you have to be willing to die for them. It's what the Bible tells us. You know, we have an all-star show 39. Adam Sandler is here with us tonight. There's a new NBA basketball movie on Netflix called Hustle, and it's really good. And then a game that was actually inspired by Adam in the movie Billy Madison. It's called Don's Basketball. I will be going head-to-head with Boban Marjanovic of the Mavericks, while kids hit our heads with dodgeball. So we'll be shooting while the kids are playing basketball. And I will tell you this, I went out and tried it this afternoon. It's terrible. Over the years, NBA players have been using their star power to sell us stuff. You'll undoubtedly see evidence of that during the game tonight. But commercials have come a very long way since companies started putting athletes in them. And to prove it, it's time to count down the best, worst NBA commercials. And number 3, Boban Marjanovic, World Car.
Get connected. Get fast speeds, built-in Wi-Fi, and new plans with 50% more data. So you can do more of what you want online. More shopping. More surfing. More sharing with the ones you love.
Get us there, India. Wake up, America. This is never, ever going to stop. The nuclear WW3 really hit America. This is the judgment and wrath of God. It's coming. The wrath of God is coming sooner than we think that we least expect it. It's going to start 2 o'clock in the morning.